Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, my name is Deeanna and I make videos about mental health and self-improvement. And in today's video I am going to be talking about the times that I was sectioned based on my experience here within the UK.
And trying to remain so strong. I know it's good if I'm wrong. I got it.
So it's no surprise to anyone from my stories, and if anyone knows me, that I have been sectioned. I have been sectioned numerous times, and I have also been an informal patient. And an informal patient is defined as somebody who is agreeing to be there within their treatment, and they are agreeing to be admitted to get help that they need. And a formal patient or a sectioned patient is somebody that's being held against their will for treatment or assessment. So a section 2 here within the UK is admission for assessment, which basically is up to a 28-day period where somebody is being assessed for their mental health under the guidance of an admission. They're being held against their will. They're deemed as to lack capacity or to have a lacking incapacity to make the decision whether they are unwell or not. A section 3 is defined as an admission for treatment, which means that you cannot refuse treatment and you basically have to stay there for a period of up to 6 months, and then that also can be renewed, whereas the section 2 can only be used once per admission. So I have never been on a section 3. I have been close to going on to section 3, but never been on a section 3. I've only been on a section 2. So I basically have been sectioned on a section 2 about 3 or 4 times, and I will get into the details of why, how, and the circumstances relating to that. So the first time that I was sectioned under the Mental Health Act, I was actually at my parents' house home alone because they were on holiday and I couldn't afford to go on holiday with them, and I'd just finished my first year of mental health nursing, and yeah, I wasn't very well, but I had no other choice but to be home alone. So I was home alone and I was, not very well, but also not like at the point of, needing to be in the contact with like mental health services or anything, but the loneliness definitely got to me, and the loneliness definitely contributed to my rapid decline in my mental health following coming home and following all the things that had happened at uni. So I'd been home maybe a week or 10 days, and I was starting to get into the hang of things, of living on my own. Like, I'd never actually been home alone for that sort of period of time. I'd been home alone for a day or two, but I'd never been home alone with the prospect of having to stay home alone for about a month. And I hadn't really prepared myself, I suppose, for it. So after about 10 days of being home alone, I started to decline rapidly. And I was in contact with the crisis team, who basically, were calling me once a day to keep an eye on me. And, there was this one particular day I remember that I self-harmed. I then called the crisis team, who then said they were doing handover. They'd call me back in about 10 minutes after their handover. And I then went back upstairs and I self-harmed some more and missed 2 calls from them. I then came back downstairs and I called them back, and they basically said that I was 1 call away from them having to call an ambulance because of my, sort of welfare and bits and pieces. And so I goes, "Oh, please don't call an ambulance," sort of thing. And she goes, "But why didn't you answer?" And I said, "Because I was self-harming." And she turned around and she said, "Well, as you're refusing to stop self-harming, I'm gonna have to call an ambulance." And I tried to beg with her not to call an ambulance, and she said, "I'm gonna have to." And so I remember just sitting there thinking, oh shit. I remember thinking there, what have I done now? Because I've never had somebody else call an ambulance on me. I've called an ambulance on myself before when I've, made an attempt at my own life, and I've regretted it in a way, but not fully. So I've kind of self-helped, but I've self-rescued. And this time, I was the whole power of calling the ambulance was out of my control. And she called the ambulance, they came and they looked at my cuts, which then they deemed as superficial. But they still took me into hospital because they asked, what my plans to do now if they were to leave me at home. And I said, I'm going to self-harm again. And they basically said, well, we're not going to let you do that, like knowing that. But just to put it in context, if I'm so unwell that I can't function, I will literally tell you what it is, like face value. If I want to off myself, I will tell you that I want to off myself. Like, I'm not going to hide nothing from anyone, and that is just how I am when I'm unwell. And I basically was then put into the A&E part of the hospital. They looked at my cuts, they said it was superficial, so they sent me home. They did like a bit of a mental health assessment, I suppose. Like the A&E doctor looked at me and he kind of said, oh well, you seem stable enough, the cuts are superficial, like you haven't made an attempt in your own life, you can go home. So I went home. And following going home, I was there for about another 48 hours before I was back in A&E following an overdose. And I OD'd and then I self-rescued, as the crisis team and the mental health team like to say. So I self-rescued, and at this point, self-rescuing at this particular point of like my mental health journey, self-rescuing was seen as you self-rescued, so therefore you didn't really want to do it. And I want to debug that right now. So if any other mental health professionals watching this and they see this video, and if you take one thing away from this video, if somebody self-rescued, that doesn't necessarily mean that they didn't want to do it at the time. That's not how it works. It's not. It's just not how it works. Like, if somebody self-rescued, they might regret it, or they might have some remorse for doing what they did, but it doesn't mean that they just didn't really want to die. That's not how brains usually work. Like, in that moment of doing the act that they've done, they obviously wanted to do it, and they wanted the outcome that could have come because of that. But afterwards, if they self-rescue, they can regret what they've done and then maybe want to get help for it, but they don't necessarily not want to die anymore. Like, that's not how it works. So I said, if you want to take one thing from this video, just know that if somebody self-rescues, it doesn't mean that they don't want to die. So this is where I have a bit of a memory where it's very broken and very PC. So this part of my journey in this particular admission to hospital for being sectioned, I don't remember, but I don't remember going into A&E, and I also don't remember like needing any sort of medical intervention, but I must have done, because I was admitted to a physical health ward, so I must have needed something. And I remember now, the next memory I have is being in this physical health ward and a psychiatrist assessing me. So a psychiatrist comes, assesses me, and he basically said he's going to arrange for a mental health act assessment, because he would ask me questions and I would just turn it back round to I want to die. Like, every single question he would ask me, he would say, so what are your plans? If I was to discharge you, what are your plans? And I'd say, I want to die, or I'm going to kill myself. And that was all I was saying as a response. And I remember saying that, and I remember being in that trance, almost like a trance-like state, where I didn't really understand, I suppose, what I was saying in a way. And so he arranged for a mental health act assessment, with his recommendation being that I be sectioned. So he arranged for this assessment, and as part of this assessment I had two other mental health approved people, like the AMP people here in the UK, and normally it has to be 3, but I had 2 more because the first doctor that saw me was the first person that recommended that I be sectioned. So following that assessment, I only needed 2 people from this mental health act assessment people to say that I needed to be sectioned. And I saw 2 other people, one was a man and one was a lady, and from what I could gather, the lady was like a support worker who was an AMP, and the man was a doctor or a nurse or something like that. And they came in, and the male doctor was the one who was like leading the assessment. And again, I basically must have said, and I can't remember fully, but I must have been adamant that I wanted to kill myself. And so they sent me out the room, and 5 minutes later they brought me back in the room with this pink paperwork, and they basically said that they were sectioning me under a section 2. During this point, there's different rights involved compared to a section 2 and section 3. I'm not fully clued up on that, so I'll probably make a separate video once I've done some research. So I was sectioned under a section 2 for this admission, and I got better. I was then sent home. So that was the first admission like that I had that was sectioned. So the following times that I was sectioned, there was at least two other instances, and I can't remember, there might have been a third, so 4 in total, but there was definitely 2 more, and these 2 more instances were very similar, so I'm kind of going to combine those 2 into the other half of this video. So the other 2 instances, I was sectioned whilst already in hospital. So I'd been admitted under what's called an informal patient, which basically means that I agreed to be there, and then on both occasions I believe that I had gone into hospital, got more unwell, and decided that I didn't want to be there anymore. And because you can do that as an informal patient, you can self-discharge, you can come and go as you please, you can go to the shop, you can do all those bits and pieces as an informal patient. But as a sectioned patient, you have to either be escorted or have the rights to then have unescorted leave, which usually means that you're towards the end of your treatment. And so I was in the hospital following going in there as an informal patient, and going in there, I was like, yeah, I agreed to go there, that's fine, like I'm going to a ward that I know, like that's fine. And so I arrived there and got unwell, got even more unwell. And so I spoke to a psychiatrist about 72 hours, maybe 48 to 72 hours after I was admitted, and this psychiatrist said to me that, you know, he assessed me, and I had become more unwell in that first 72 hours to the point where I had basically decided that I didn't want to be there no more. And he asked me these questions and he said, oh, you know, if you were to go home, what would you do? And I went back into that 100% real, raw and honest, where I was just so unwell that I didn't care basically what people knew or said. So I told him exactly what I wanted to do, and so he said that he was going to arrange for a mental health act assessment. And in about, I think it was a couple of hours. So after a couple of hours, I was sitting in this room with my psychiatrist and 2 other people, and they were all asking me questions. And I was again basically just saying that I wanted to die. And from that, they basically said, we're going to section you under a section 2. Like, it's obvious we need to section you. And so that happened on 2 more occasions where I was agreeing to go into hospital, but then being sectioned whilst in hospital. And that can happen. Just because you've gone into hospital as an informal patient doesn't mean that you won't become more unwell, and it doesn't mean that they won't section you whilst you're already in hospital. Because one of the biggest differences that I already know from my experience of being in a mental health hospital is that if you're informal, you can go to the shops, you can go out, you can self-discharge, you can, you know, go into town, you can basically do a normal life in a way, apart from the fact that you come back to the ward and you basically, you know, can sleep in a ward that is deemed as safe and secure. If you're sectioned, so at the beginning when you're sectioned, you won't get any leave, you won't be able to go out to the hospital, you won't be able to go to the shops, no nothing. And that is because you are deemed as so unwell that you basically won't keep yourself safe. And then as you start to get better, the doctor can give you this other section, which I forgot what it's called, but they give you this other section, which means that you can have escorted leave. And so with a member of staff, you can go down to the shops and have escorted leave. And then when you get towards the end of your treatment, you might even get unescorted leave. But it's very different to being not sectioned. If you're sectioned and you've ever experienced being sectioned, it is a completely different, it's a world away. Like, I would never wish that upon anyone unless you were so unwell that you actually needed it. But overall, my thoughts and feelings towards being sectioned those 3 times. I needed it, and looking back, I can see that I needed it. And I hope I never need it again, pretty much, because it's so confining and so restrictive that it's just really hard. And at the time, I didn't see it as restrictive because I was so unwell that the restriction didn't really, was the last of my worries. I didn't care that I was being restricted. I didn't care that I had like less things I could do. I couldn't go out. I couldn't do what I wanted to do. But now, as a well person, I would hate to be told that I had to go into a hospital and, you know, not be able to leave and things like that. Like, that's the biggest difference. Like, the mindset of it all is that now I sit here and I think, oh, why would I want to be sectioned? And why would anyone want to be sectioned? But in reality, I know that I needed it, and looking back at how unwell I was, I know I needed it. And the doctors saw that, and I'm so grateful that they saw that, because if they didn't see that and they didn't section me, I might not be sitting here talking to you today. So I'm so grateful that the doctors helped me when they did, and although I was unable to see and be grateful at the time, I am definitely grateful in hindsight. So that is it for today's video. I'm sorry I didn't upload last week, but I basically forgot my medication for two doses, and I'm on this medication that if you forget it for like 1 or 2 days in a row, then basically you start getting withdrawal symptoms, very, very similar to like an alcohol withdrawal or a drug withdrawal, where you get like the sweats and the racing heart rate and things like that. And I had that not last night but the night before, and I was saying to myself, I'm going to go to work and I'm going to come home and I'm going to record, but I was so unwell that I just couldn't. And yeah, so that's why there was no upload last week. But hopefully I'm sitting here now and I'm going to bulk record, so hopefully there will be videos sorted for like the next few uploads, and then I shall hopefully be back on track again. I obviously made a New Year's resolution to not miss an upload, and I think I've already missed 2, so I'm not exactly happy with myself, but I'm trying. I really am trying. So if you haven't already, please don't forget to hit that subscribe button and the like button to tell people that you like this video. And if you found it helpful, please let me know in the comment section down below. But before I go, I just want to say that I believe in you even if nobody else does. And I'll see you in my next one. Bye.
Just like you're young again, no, don't you cry. Just get back up again.